within Christianity, marriage seems like this option, like, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're seeing the fruit of that mindset.
Let's look at the life of Paul. He was not married, and he, in fact, makes comments to indicate that that's actually a higher, spiritually, a higher calling to be an apostle, to be a missionary for Christ. But he's not like, oh, I'm going to get married later, or I'm going to just like find myself. It's like, no, I'm given this commission to go spread the gospel. There is this framework where I think we've forgotten that there is a calling for people to be totally committed to Christ in that way, and to possibly be celibate and to commit themselves to that. And then on the other hand, look, here's the other thing. If you are burning with desire and this is what the framework for marriage is.
Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed the interview that you are about to listen to with Skyler Kressin. Skyler has become a friend of mine, and he's local to this community. And he really, I feel like, is an example of somebody living out Christian values and it going noticed. I just noticed Skyler first a couple of years back when we were working in the same co-working space, and I noticed him bringing his kids to work with him, and he handled himself differently. And from that point forward, I wanted to get to know this guy. I wanted to talk to him, and of course, I've been able to do that since then. And so I was really grateful that he was willing to take the time and come on the podcast, share some of his story with you. So many insights from this conversation that I got, and I know you'll get many as well. I'm going to read a quick bio about Skyler, and then, of course, you're going to be able to hear more in detail about his life from him. So Skyler Kressin and his wife of 17 years have 6 children whom they homeschool. He is the founder and CEO of Archer Strategic Advisors, a specialized CPA firm offering high-value tax accounting advisory services resulting in unmatched performance. He is a director for the Society for American Civic Renewal and knows more about GK Chesterton than anyone I've ever met. That this is kind of a bio I wrote for him. It's not like something that he wrote, about himself. But I really am excited about this interview. And before we dive into it, I do want to let you know that as of right now, as of today, my favorite marriage coaches of all time are launching a product on nowthatwe'reafamily.com. Chad and Janice Johnson, my mother and father-in-law, have created a marriage program for you, for anybody. It's online. It's available to anybody in the entire world, and it's now launching. So go over to nowthatwe'reafamily.com/marriage maximizer. I'll link it below, and you can learn more about what everything that has to offer. And I've never been more excited about being able to offer a product here on Now That We're a Family. And so head over and check out the Marriage Maximizer course that my mother and father-in-law, Chad and Janice Johnson, put together. They're my favorite marriage coaches of all time. So I know you'll love it. You can go learn some more in the link below. But other than that, you can enjoy this episode.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
All right. Well, Skyler, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I already gave our listeners kind of a brief intro as to who you are. But to tell you the truth, I want to hear from your mouth what you tell people. When you bump into a friend,
sure.
You just mentioned you're getting ready to go down to California. I'm sure you'll see some old friends. What do you tell people you're doing these days?
Yeah, well, from a family life perspective, I married my high school sweetheart, so we've had a nice 17 years of marriage together, and we originally from Southern California, and moved up here to North Idaho in late 2020, so September 2020, and got 5 boys, 1 girl, and we're very fortunate to have a mix of different temperaments, strengths, abilities, and so that also makes it so we're very motivated to homeschool, which has been a really great thing for us. We are sending our oldest to a classical high school that we helped found here in North Idaho that just started this last fall, but we've basically from start to finish homeschooled everybody else, and we intend to keep doing so for the first 8 years of life. Professionally, I'm a CPA. I'm a tax advisor. I have a tax advisory practice that I launched not too long after I moved up here, so and employ a couple people in the area, and then still have an employee down in Southern California as well. And so, just kind of trying to do everything I can to make this community a better place, and do as much as I can from both an economic perspective and then also a cultural and institutional perspective, while also guarding the home as well, and our family culture.
Wow, I mean, just everything you just said gets me fired up, inspires me. Just even that last statement, trying to make as much of an impact as you can in the local community while protecting and nurturing and really, I guess, making sure that the family flourishes and grows. And I didn't realize that your ratio is 5 boys to 1 girl. So you're a strong boy family, and Katie and I are pregnant with our 4th boy, and so we're going to be a 4 to 1 ratio, and a pretty strong boy family.
Yep.
Which honestly, I don't know if I ever envisioned myself being the boy dad, but so far I've loved it. I feel like in so many ways I get to like relive my childhood, through.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up with any brothers, so it's they're getting a very different experience, my boys. So, but it makes, as they get older, I've heard families that are more girl heavy, there's a lot more help around the house in terms of chores without haranguing the boys.
Yes.
So that is one major difference, but they're a lot of fun, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, I think that was one of my friends when we first started having kids. He said, you need to have a girl as soon as possible. He goes, there's so much help around the house. I was like, okay, well, I'll do what I can.
Yeah.
To try to get the girl as soon as possible.
God willing.
Yeah, so I've loved, getting to see you here and there, and I feel like I've more observed you from a distance than gotten to know you, very personally.
Sure.
And anybody that I bring you up to, whether it's locally, they only have good things to say about you. And even when you were saying you really want to affect the community in a positive way, protect the culture of your home, I feel like that's got to be the desire of hopefully so many Christian parents' hearts.
Yeah.
They're thinking, okay, I want to engage. I want to raise up children that are capable of engaging and having an impact in society.
Yep.
But at the same time, this thing, the home unit, the family unit, there is something to also protecting that, because we've seen it go the other way. I mean, it's pretty terrible that the whole pastor's kid, the PK, the stigma around that is not healthy at all.
Yeah.
It's quite the opposite of, if you're taking care of the flock, meaning the church, or you're out doing ministry or out in the world, that it's usually associated with neglecting the home.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually just talking to a friend this morning about this very issue, and the way we put it is, if you make your identity primarily tied up, and your activities and your sole focus tied up with your church community as the source of your identity, that's where you run into problems, because number one, you're neglecting the true foundation of how you should perpetuate the faith and really create a healthy culture. Number two, if that church goes away, or if there's a scandal, or if some people at the church are in some way, shape, or form not acting in a charitable manner,
that would never happen.
That would never happen in church communities. No, then you're devastated, and so you need to have that foundation of the family culture as your number one thing, and then like-minded families around you who are on the same page about family culture as the kind of foundation of your community, and that may or may not have a total correspondence with your church community.
Sure. Yeah. Like, hopefully you can find a church community that is very aligned with your beliefs and values, but you also can't depend or count on that necessarily.
That's right.
I even think of my own experience growing up, and I loved my childhood, loved my parents, and just so grateful for the role that they've played in my life and continue to play. But we jumped, I shouldn't say jumped, like it was an irresponsible jumping from church to church, or it wasn't anything like that, but we were part of different homeschool organizations. We were part of different churches, but the constant was my dad was the leader of our home.
Right.
He was our counselor, our protector, our provider. Right. He was the person overseeing our spiritual development throughout all of that. And and it's pretty cool that there was that consistency all the way through.
Yeah.
And that brings stability. So I've heard you talk a little bit about kind of this mindset around almost treating your home like a business, or the economy of the home. And I love that language. I've talked about it a bit on this podcast already, but I don't know if you can kind of expand upon that.
Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily say treating your home or your household as a business per se, but treating your household as a household economy, treating your family as a household economy. And it almost has more of a political nature to it than it does just purely a business nature, because, with business, you're dealing, directly with the public, that sort of thing. And so I would say it's a little bit more of an intimate thing. And the household economy that I talk about is really what provides a sense of common purpose for the household to be productive together towards some common goal. Now, that may be business oriented, and that would be great if it is, but it may also not be business oriented. It may be related to something you're doing charitably. It may be related to something you're doing with respect to ministry. It may be related to something you're doing with art. Any of those things, it may not correspond to, strictly speaking, we're offering a product, but at the same time, it is nonetheless productive in the deepest sense of the word.
I think of that, and I love you explaining that, because it's not just got this, it's not like commerce. You're not like, okay, we've got to have what's our family product or service that we're offering, and we go out there and make money. Although family businesses are awesome, and I think it's a great thing to be able to pursue. But you talk about engaging in a mission, maybe, or purpose around ministry or around music. I grew up in a family band. That was something that was it was a core part of our culture. It's like we played music together. We all took lessons and played it together. But when I look around, it's crazy to even say Christian culture, because I would say whether you call it mainstream Christian, whatever big evangelical, whatever the term is that you want to use.
Sure.
What I see being promoted is this pursuit of individualistic ideals and goals when it comes to your children. In fact, people are taught like they need to have their own identity, their own individual purpose and skill set or passion project. And it doesn't seem, speak to that. Are you saying you're not doing that, or how does that fit into that?
Totally not doing that. And that's totally a modern, contemporary, unfortunate, effect of kind of our atomized, individualistic culture. The whole idea that you should send your children off at age 18 to go find themselves and go to college and all this stuff is just totally contrary to how you build a sustainable culture that's rooted in one place and that actually really can comprehensively provide for the cultural grounding for the good practices and habits and growth and virtue that needs to be promoted. So, on the contrary, the assumption should be that your children stay with the family enterprise if possible. They should contribute to the family culture as much as possible. They should stay connected as much as possible. And by the way, we should be aiming for, assuming children are well-formed, we should be aiming for young marriage and family formation as well. Amen. None of which is achieved by sending people away to sow their oats.
Yeah, it's funny when I think about... I don't know if it's funny. It's interesting when I think about some of the young adult conferences I went to, or even high school conferences I'd go to as a young Christian, maybe unintentionally diminish the value of marriage.
Right.
And I think that that's come to a place in our culture now where within Christianity, marriage seems like this option, like, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
Wait a long time. Maybe kids, maybe not kids.
Right.
And unfortunately, we're seeing the fruit of that mindset.
Right.
And who's is pursuing the family? Secularism, paganism. They're saying we want a family. It doesn't matter if you're, a heterosexual relationship. You can still be a family.
Oh, sure.
Does that make
totally
sense?
Changed the definition of what a family is.
Yes. Anyways, so I say that all to say, how does that look in your home? Because you already mentioned at the beginning, and I'm talking way too much, and I want to pass it over to you, but you mentioned at the beginning, you've got different temperaments in your home.
Yeah.
You've got different personalities. And so you're not raising a bunch of clones, sounds like, that to say, hey, you all have to be CPAs within the family enterprise. We're all going to do this. So what does that look like?
Today we're going to share something with you guys that is so exciting. We've been working on it behind the scenes for the past couple months, and that is we are launching a Marriage Maximizer, which is an online marriage program that we've partnered with my parents to create. My parents have been married for 30 years. Over that time, they have been coaching other couples when it comes to marriage for the last 15 years. And I cannot think of a marriage that I respect more than my parents' marriage, which is kind of crazy when you think that I grew up in their home where they had 11 biological kids, and I got to watch how they worked through disagreements. I got to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I just respect them more and more and more.
Yeah, since before Katie and I were married, Chad and Janice have been our favorite marriage coaches or marriage mentors. And as time's gone on and I've gotten to know them more and see more of the fruit from their marriage and from their lives, I've only grown in the admiration and respect that I have for them. So to be able to partner with them and create Marriage Maximizer as a Now That We're a Family product, honestly, it's kind of humbling. But beyond that, I'm just pumped. Like, I'm really excited that we get to be associated with Chad and Janice, that we get to offer this product to you, because it is so valuable. Katie and I use these resources, these tools, these frameworks, and these mindsets every single day. They have been the most helpful things for our marriage. And so we're so grateful that we get to offer them to you in this online space. And so be sure to check the link below. You'll see all the details there. Katie, is there anything else they need to know?
Well, I just want you to know this is a very vulnerable course. When we thought about who we wanted to speak to marriage to our audience and someone that we could completely back and get behind, we thought of my parents. Just their vulnerability and their realness. You are going to laugh with them on this. You're going to also watch a lot of tears as they talk about really hard times in their marriage and struggles with pornography and struggles with biblical roles and miscommunication and, having 6 kids and living in a tent in a trailer. They get really raw about the ups and downs, the highs and lows in their marriage, and then the tools and resources that they used, starting with scripture and then building out practical ways to implement that scripture in their marriage, that not only gave them a thriving marriage that they're grateful to be a part of it. I'm grateful to be the recipient of that.
Benefactor.
Yeah, the blessing of that. But also what has helped them coach hundreds and hundreds of couples over the last 10 to 15 years. So regardless of what your background is, I think you're going to be so encouraged by this program. Up until this point, my parents have only coached newlyweds or had a super high-end marriage retreat that is close to $6,000 to attend. So neither of those are really great options for people like us who are young and we feel like we want that input. Again, we want to be able to revisit all these things, especially in this season of having young kids and creating the foundation for our family. And so we not only get to access this content now when we need it for support in our marriage, but also we get to give that to you guys. So super, super excited to be able to do that. And actually tomorrow night, my parents are doing a live Q&A on creating a masterpiece marriage. So not only is the link to enroll linked down below, but also there will be a link to jump on that Q&A if you guys want to meet them in person, if you want to ask questions specific to your marriage or ask them anonymously. There's a link to register for that down below. It's going to be Wednesday, 6:30 at Pacific Standard Time.
At Pacific Standard Time.
So I think this might be a good segue into, some differences maybe in how we think of vocations. If you go back to St. Paul, and this is in Corinthians chapter 1 or 1:7, he basically 1 Corinthians 7, he basically lays out what Christian marriage is, and he has a little commentary about that. And to your point about the single people or about people going on missionary work, that sort of thing, let's look at the life of Paul. So Paul was celibate, right? He was not married, and he in fact makes comments to indicate that that's actually a higher calling to be an apostle, to be a missionary for Christ. And so, but he's not like, oh, I'm going to get married later, or I'm going to just like find myself. It's like, no, I'm given this commission to go spread the gospel, even to the point of death, which he is martyred eventually. And so there is this framework where I think we've forgotten that there is a calling for people to be totally committed to Christ in that way, and to possibly be celibate and to commit themselves to that. And then on the other hand, what does he say in that 1 Corinthians passage? He says, look, here's the other thing. If you are, burning with desire, and this is what the framework for marriage is. And so these are both callings. They both have their own elevated and sanctified way of expressing themselves within the Christian tradition. And so with respect to my own children, that's really the discernment. Are you called to marriage and family life? In which case, staying close to family, getting integrated into the community as much as possible, and actually finding a spouse as young as possible that you can spend the rest of your life with and be committed with, and the generation and education of children. That's the ideal. And so keeping them around for that and getting them on a more practically oriented path is awesome. On the other hand, if I have some boys who are called to actually go out and really commit their lives completely to Christ, then I do think that entails probably some education theologically, something that entails basically an apostolate for them to be able to actually express that vocation. And so that's kind of how I view it. And we should probably mention to your viewers or listeners, I am Catholic. So
whoa,
that is a enshrined calling within the church, is the priestly order, which is celibate, following St. Paul. So
yeah, and I would even say, and of course, we've got many traditional Catholic listeners, and I think something that's really I've grown to respect you, and I've actually had this kind of affinity towards some of the traditional Catholic ideals and values, is because over recent years, much of evangelicalism has become quiet and very inactive, right, when it comes to things pertaining to this physical world.
Right.
And some of my favorite theologians, pastors, you name it, come 2020, were just silent. And I think there was a bunch of wandering Christians saying like, okay, like we have to think something about what's going on in society, and people saying, hey, just preach Jesus, just preach the gospel. It became a little confusing. We're saying, okay, you look at what Jesus taught, what he preached, you look at the whole of God's word, and they talk about physical things. And this led me to this path of, I've been listening to a lot of the Reformed Presbyterian, and I was just joking about this with Katie. I was thinking, the three different groups of people, from Christian tradition, that I've been learning a lot from are Reformed Presbyterians, traditional Catholics, and then these charismatics that are actually getting out and doing stuff, right?
Yeah.
And of course, I've got theological differences with all of them when it comes to the roots and the foundations of my faith, doctrinal differences.
Sure.
But I find so much encouragement and help from the practical application of their faiths, of their traditions, of doing things in the home, in the family, being able to say something is wrong and something's right. It's bizarre to me how that's become such a foreign thing in the evangelical space.
Yeah.
Of saying, well, maybe it's not such a good thing that Roe versus Wade was overturned. And I'm thinking, okay, if we can't call that a good thing, is anything good? Anyways, so thanks for saying that. And you can mention this too. You can say your thoughts on this. The 1 Corinthians chapter 7 passage. I would argue that's a minority that are called to celibacy.
Yeah.
To the eunuch for Christ. That is not the normative.
Right.
And I don't know if that's how you view it too.
No, that's...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's better to marry than to burn.
Right.
And I'd say, okay, well, I'd say that's a high percentage
for sure
of Christians.
For sure.
And I feel like you probably can identify that pretty early in your life.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I would say probably the situation, at least in the Catholic Church, is that it historically was that there were a lot more that did choose that path and that were called, and that everything that happened in the 1960s and 70s and, just kind of the cultural revolution that happened then just made people kind of fall off from even considering that as a possible path. And so we're kind of getting back to the point where people are actually now considering it.
Yes.
And, I think that in general, the call of Christians is to mortify the flesh, right? We're called to mortify the flesh, and although it's a natural and good thing to, be in a marital union, that sort of thing, at the same time, just like the practice of fasting and abstinence and that sort of thing, those are all practices that are just woven throughout the entire tradition that are good practices to incorporate. And so the question of celibacy, it's like that's just part and parcel with that overall picture of fleshly mortification, mortifying our fleshly desires, or putting them in their right place. So,
yeah. And what's interesting is something that I've heard a change in the tone, at least in the people that I listen to around sexual sin, around sin, is they've almost given up hope, as though like, hey, you know what? Maybe you can manage it. So, for instance, growing up in conservative environments, and I can't say I was perfect, and I'm well aware of my sin and my shortcomings.
Sure.
And my wife is too, and my parents are too. But the way people talk now about pornography or sexual sin is as though it's kind of this given. Like,
right.
You can't, like, this isn't going to happen. You're not going to see total freedom in this area.
Right.
And that's contrary to, again, I can't say I've walked in perfection in this area, but
Sure.
I have experienced true victory
Right.
in this area. And I know many people that have.
Right.
It's one of these things where it's like, why are we saying that we can't actually have self-control when that's what we're given in the fruits of the Spirit?
Right.
Right. And it says that we are buried with Christ, that we're dead to sin. We've been given all things pertaining to life and godliness, and this ability to walk not in sinless perfection. And that's not something that I adhere to. I think we are always dependent on the grace of God covering our insufficiency and our ability to walk in perfection. But when it comes to these besetting sins that are rampant in culture,
Right.
To me, the expectation as Christians should be, of course, that 99% of the world is doing this, and we are not of the world. We're told fornication is something to be abhorred and to run from. Pornography should be abhorred, not something that's kind of like, well, hey, you shouldn't do this because look at what's happening to the brain. Scientifically, this is really bad, and it's like crack cocaine, and you're thinking, no, it's a sin. That's why we don't do it.
Yeah, and it should be a fruit of cooperation with grace, that there is a progressive sanctification that occurs through that cooperation.
There you
with
go.
God's
Cooperation, grace. I knew I was going to get to that. No, yeah. Well, yeah, go ahead. What do you mean by that?
Oh, what I mean is that, if you're in a place where you're truly open to the operation of God's grace in your life, and you're open to that, that's what's going to be able to operate within you to create the sanctification that occurs over time.
Amen.
And we should be able to expect that.
Amen. Yeah, I mean, you think of coming to Christ, the thought that your physical life wouldn't change is really a strange thing to me.
Right.
And when I look at practical Christian living, it seems like people are scared of legalism, which is not good. Legalism is not a good thing. But something that's I find interesting is that, when people talk about the Pharisees, so people say, oh, they're legalistic, right? It's like, well, they're actually called hypocrites. They weren't called legalists necessarily.
Right.
Basically saying what they were promoting wasn't a bad thing. What was bad is that they weren't living up to that said thing.
Right. And they weren't conforming to the spirit of it. They were just,
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So when you're raising your kiddos, you've got a 16-year-old. Is that a son?
Yep.
Okay, so your oldest is a son. We live in this world where things like technology, it's just assumed, right?
Yeah.
And if anything, it's hard to picture living in a functional way without some relationship with technology.
Yeah.
And yet that is a pitfall. I mean, I think of, we already mentioned pornography. We don't even need to speak specifically to that, but I know that just being a huge thing is a phone, an iPhone technology.
Right.
How have you navigated that as a father?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we've never, our kids have never had smartphones. So my 16-year-old doesn't have a smartphone. He does have a flip phone. He usually leaves it at home because he's
nice.
Yeah,
that's right. Okay, you already knew that.
I already knew that. Yeah,
that's good. Yeah.
But yeah, he has a flip phone. Very low tech. Hardly ever uses it. One of the things that really motivated us in the high school that we helped to found was just the complete absence of technology in classroom instruction, or even allowed on campus at all. There are no cell phones even allowed. If they're ever seen, they're immediately confiscated. That I don't think that's really happened yet. But anyway, I think they might actually turn them in upon arrival to the front desk.
Yes.
So yeah, and then at home, we don't have a TV. We want to limit screen time in terms of that. We do have, like a few laptops, that sort of thing. We have a software called Canopy that we use for that. That's basically, it's kind of like the best in class, in my opinion, in terms of protecting, from online bad stuff online, because not only can you do things like whitelists and block sites, but it also through its own software, if you install it, if you do an image search or there's an ad that pops up, if that ad is in any way suggestive or the image search, it will just proactively block the display of it. So you can't, there's really very little you can do to get around it.
So it's not even just reactive, where it's like
No.
you get your report, like
Nope.
I think Covenant Eyes or something like that. You get
Correct.
the report. It's actually, like you said, proactively,
Right.
in real time.
Right.
Yeah, modifying.
Right. And then aside from that, it's just they don't have much time to be able to engage in this. Like nobody's, we live in a historic home here in downtown Coeur d'Alene, and it's not a huge home. And we like it that way because we want the family to be super connected all the time, and we don't want our 16-year-old to have his own room way back on the other side of the house where he can be, closing and locking the door, that sort of thing.
Yes.
So,
you know what? I love the practicality of that. I was just talking to, it was actually my brother. He's got done building a house and beautiful home, plenty of square footage, but he made the kids' rooms small. Right. And he has a boys' room and a girls' room, and people are asking, well, what are you doing? He's like, well, I don't want my kids hanging out in their rooms by themselves.
Right.
I don't want this to be a place of retreat or for them to be able to be reclusive in any way. And I just love that's a very practical thing.
Yeah.
Set up your home so that it's more likely to be together. Right. Physically, for that proximity.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the other thing too is just creating a positive experience with the things that are good that are not, just the typical media entertainment, that sort of thing. And so, my son's really taken to classical guitar. He loves it. He plays for the family. My other son does cello, and they've, so kind of getting to I'm sure nothing like what your family was growing up, but, still that's a big part of, our family culture. And then not only that, but, exposing them to the films that we think truly are worthy of elevating to, hey, this is a great film that shows great principles, and it's also really well made, that sort of thing, and creating kind of a contempt for the popular culture instantiations of a lot of entertainment and media, because they'll see the contrast between those things.
Yes.
If you see a really well-made film, you listen to music that's really well done, then everything, that's in contemporary society will just seem really lame in comparison. So
yeah, I mean, I think of that just. Yeah, and that's such a good point. I think I'll turn it into a TikTok. No, I'm joking. I'm being ironic there with the point of long, quality entertainment versus cheap TikTok type stuff.
Right.
And here's my question to that. Okay, because I love everything you just said. However, okay, this is something that I really want to be conscientious of as I'm raising children. My youngest is 6, so 10 years, behind where you're at with your kiddos. And this is a common question. They're going to be exposed to stuff, right? Like they say this is inevitable. People say it's inevitable. You go in the world. You're going to go and you're going to see things that you wouldn't choose to see.
Right.
And do all of these boundaries or these strict guidelines prevent you as a parent or prevent the child from getting to the heart of the issue? That we talked about the Pharisees not having. How does that look?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things we do is we subscribe to a lot of print publications, and the Wall Street Journal, so we get the paper Wall Street Journal on a daily basis. And just that alone just kind of gives an indication of things going on in the world. Yes. Wall Street Journal is at best neutral. It's like got all sorts of headlines about, hey, there's a any of the social issues that you would find uncomfortable, that's covered in that newspaper. Yes. And so when I have my 13-year-old or 14-year-old now and 16-year-old boys reading that on a daily basis, they're getting exposed to it. Yes. It's getting exposed to it though in a context where it's written, it's just stated matter of fact, this is what's going on. And so then that generates conversations about any number of topics. Wow. I also subscribe to some other magazines like First Things, for example, which, is an ecumenical Christian journal of politics that's out of New York City that, it just tackles all sorts of, social issues that are, facing society right now. And so we don't shy away at all about discussing a lot of this stuff, and we don't shy away at all about the agenda of, a lot of what's being pushed out there. And also, we live in downtown Coeur d'Alene. So, that in and of itself, just walking around and observing, hey, this is what some other people look like. This is what other people are doing. This is what this flag means, is an opportunity for conversation.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I mean, you guys live like in the one liberal corner of Coeur d'Alene over there, which is great. I'm glad you guys are over there having an impact. I think that's really helpful to hear, because something that I've heard a lot of Christians advocate is what I would consider, rated R content in the median of literature, movies, whatever, and justified it saying, hey, none of this is worse than what the Bible talks about, right? The violence, the sexual sin, the debauchery of the Bible. Yeah. But I'm like, well, yeah, but it's not displayed in this way. Like, it's not matter of fact.
I think that would be disturbing for young kids. Now, for my older boys, seeing movies that are a little bit more violent, I'm okay with that.
Sure.
But that being said, there's plenty of stuff out there that has great content and themes that doesn't have that level of violence. We have a tradition every Easter of watching Ben-Hur, for example. All the younger kids watch it too, and there's some intense moments and stuff in there. It's very entertaining,
right?
But it's not at the level of first of all, anything sexual.
Yes.
Second of all, there's just the gratuitous gore, that sort of stuff. Like, I just don't see any reason to.
No, yeah, and I think the point that I was making is that when it's talked about in the Bible, it's not glamorized.
Right.
It's not. You don't have this descriptive writer whose skill set is to make you picture every little minute detail, that maybe is written out in a romance novel or in a violent. It's like, no. He said, especially when you're reading old, I read King James version of my kids, and it says, so and so lied with so and so, or he knew his wife, and you're thinking, okay, that's matter of fact,
right?
People are able to write about that or display that on a screen in a way that is way more of an explicit stumbling block than you're reading about it in the Bible.
Totally.
So,
totally
I feel like it's not a good excuse. Does that make sense?
Right.
To expose your kids to terrible content. So as you're homeschooling your kiddos, when you look at equipping them for engaging in civic society and their own families, do you kind of have some core tenets that you're looking for? Because you've already mentioned, you're a CPA, which we could talk about, I'm sure, here in a bit. What are you looking for in your kids to have them equipped to, not that we ever stop growing, but you're thinking, when they're 18, I want to have these mindsets, these skill sets, these values. What does that look like for you? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I want them to be able to your point about exposing them to what's going on in the world. I want them to have a good knowledge of what generally is going on. We're not sheltering them, getting the daily newspaper, us talking about stuff, that's a big deal for me. So being basically aware of the state we're in as a society, I think, is a really big deal, and being able to anticipate the fact that there are people out there who have radically different values and views than you, and you're going to encounter them, and this is what their motivations are, I think is really important. In terms of other aspects, in terms of their faith and their development personally, I mean, we made a commitment to them starting to work pretty early. So when we moved here, my son was 14 at the time. He got a job at a diner that's walking distance from our house. Cool. And so he was a busboy there, and learned a lot from doing that work, and how to interact with people and adults of various different backgrounds, etc. My other son has an internship right now. He's 14, doing some software development work. So getting work experience when you're, in those early teen years, I think is really important.
Yes.
For that preparation for adulthood. And then as far as just kind of the faith, I mean, really, that's when you make your faith your own, really, ideally, is in those teen years. And so being able to have regular, difficult one-on-one conversations about what that means, I think, is really important. So setting aside the time to do that. And I mean, I guess that kind of sums it up as far as the broad strokes. So.
Yeah, and when I think of those hard conversations, which I feel like is just such an integral piece of discipleship within your home, there's got to be opportunity for it. I think sometimes, at least in my experience, it's hard growing up with a father that was very intentional and had a lot of those conversations. It's not like my dad, said, okay, 5:30, we're going to have a hard conversation, or like, hey, come to me with all the things you're questioning or you need to confess or you're feeling guilty about. It was I needed the opportunity. It was riding in the truck with him when he was going to work and running errands and finally getting up the gumption or the nerve to ask questions or to, bring something up, confess something. And this is something that I really have admired about you from afar is your boys and your kid, they're doing life with you from what I can see. Meaning I don't know. And I see you a lot because I don't think I mentioned this before. There's this co-working space that I was a part of, and you had an office kind of, you still do, I think, rented, off to the side of this co-working space. So I would see you a lot, and I still do see you a lot in the area, in the community. And you almost always have a child with you, one of your kiddos. And I admire that big time. When I think about just doing life with my kids, that presenting the opportunity for conversation, is that something, doing life with your kids, having them come to work with you, is that something that was modeled to you? You got the idea, you were able just to do it because of your career, or is it something that, you had to really, I guess, how did that come to pass? I should just ask you.
Right. Well, it actually was something that I had to intentionally incorporate into my life because of the fact that starting off my career, I had kind of a rough time in the sense that I was, if anyone knows anything about doing work as a CPA, public accounting, my life after I graduated with my bachelor's was, pretty limited in terms of family time because I was working a ton of overtime.
Kind of sweatshop.
Yeah.
Years,
so it was really bad. So I actually implemented fairly early on what I called breakfast days. And so those would be days where I would, twice a week, I'd on rotation take one of the kids out, just one-on-one, get up early, let's go have breakfast, maybe go on a walk together and just have that time to be able to kind of, debrief with one another and talk to one another and, ask them how they were doing. And so I've continued it all these years. And so, and then owning my own business, that's really opened up the opportunity. And then living within walking distance to my office, being able to go back and forth to the home. I mean, those are all factors in this. So
wow. And did family, when you were making these decisions? Because I guess I'm curious as to how this intentionality has come to be, because you feel those things you just said, starting your own business, living close to your office, walking distance. Those are things did those happen coincidentally, or were you thinking, I want to start my own business because of the family? I want to have a home that's close to my office.
Yeah.
Because those are great things I think you can retroactively say that's pretty cool, but that's a cool thing to shoot for.
No, it was intentional for sure.
Yes, that makes sense. And was this something that you were exposed to at an early age, or what was your experience growing up?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent. My dad did own his own business, and he did have, it was a custom cabinetry shop. So, so it was about just a mile away from our house. So that was really nice. And he would, sometimes come home for lunch, and sometimes I'd go to his shop, and so there was a lot of that going on. So yeah, I think I would say that was kind of like seen as the norm in many ways.
Yes.
And it was always something where I knew that this kind of close relationship between the household and work was always kind of implicitly there. Even if it wasn't explained to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and what is this dynamic like with you and your wife? When I think of getting on the same page as Kate, my wife, Katie, how crucial that is to the flow of the home. It's one thing if you're, you don't want to be a two-headed snake here, right, with two different visions. How has this conversation gone with your wife? Because she's seeing probably a different side of the home than you are, and how do you guys stay connected and keep that vision and aligned?
Yeah, well, early on in our marriage, we implemented once a week date nights. Nice. So non-negotiable. Every week we get away for 2 or 3 hours, go out to dinner, spend time together. So that's, one way we are definitely on the same page. And if things ever come up with respect to, household stuff or my business, it's just a great opportunity to have that time set aside to talk about those issues. Aside from that, I mean, we just talk pretty consistently about kind of what our values are and ideals are. And I actually really admire my wife actually pushed us several years ago to really write down a family mission statement and to actually make that instantiated in kind of the prioritization process of what we were going to do regularly with our time. And so having that in mind, always in the back of our minds as this is what our family's mission is, I think is also a huge deal.
Wow. And is that something that is being revised as time goes on? You're thinking we want to make this more clear, we want to take this out, or is it being morphed, or is it something that's just kind of set in stone?
I mean, I think we could in theory amend it.
Sure.
It's served us well for now.
Wow.
So yeah.
I feel like that's such a cool thing. And you've said so many things that you say, and when you say it, you're like, oh, that makes so much sense. Like, why wouldn't you, set aside a time multiple times a week to connect with your kids for breakfast, or,
right.
To solidify that weekly date night, or to just be intentional with family, evening times or whatever it is.
Yep.
And yet it's not always obvious to people, right? Like when I say people, I mean, I'm just talking about myself here or people that I come across. You just kind of let the flow of life take you, and family becomes an afterthought.
Right.
Now, what could you say to people other than just saying, okay, be more intentional? Because obviously the environment that you're around matters,
Yep.
what your influences are.
Yep.
Does the community that you are a part of, do you feel like you're aligned with this, or do you guys feel like an anomaly when it comes to your family values and the intentionality that you put into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're fairly aligned. I would say in general, the norm is to kind of have the ideal of the father supporting the household, the mother kind of really cultivating a home culture, when he's away, and family dinners and openness to life, to many children. This is all part of the culture of the community that we're in. I would also say, though, at the same time that every family is different, so it's not like it's going to manifest in the same way. Sure. And so, to a large degree, you kind of have to. Once you make the decision to be radically intentional, that's going to look a little bit different.
Sure.
And so you can't necessarily rely on outside pressure to basically make you do that. That being said, I think that, the more that we talk about this and the more that we recognize that we're being pulled in so many different directions in contemporary life with the distractions that are in front of us, I think more and more people are recognizing that, okay, it is better to not have a long commute. It is better to get rid of the smartphone. It is better to limit screen time. It is better to have family dinners. This is just more fulfilling as you have more children, as your life progresses. Your family life is going to be kind of that center. And if you let yourself get involved in a ton of different things and get distracted by a ton of different things, then it's going to go by the wayside. And so, I guess in general, I just think that the kind of ideal of what family life is and was in the last 50, 60, 70 years, really just, it cuts against that. And, I see people all the time where they've signed their children up for multiple sports programs and extracurriculars and school things and various other things. And it's like, you're now no longer even creating a family culture at all. You're doing what you think you should do for the sake of your children. You're signing them up for various things. But, what they really need is that stability and intentionality of the home life being really solid.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yet, that's not what's promoted in culture and society. You have to be so intentional to protect that family time. And I'm wondering how this has looked for you over the last, say, your oldest is 16, so I could really just say, the last 16 years, because I feel like Katie and I, once you said, I think you made the statement, once you decide to be radically intentional,
yeah,
which is a great thing to decide, right? Like, I feel like, okay, well, let's start with that. Let's make the decision to be radically intentional with our family and with our children. And then baked into that means that, like, okay, we should assume this is not going to come naturally, right? This isn't going to come easily, and it's not going to even be common. Meaning, like, it might not even, you mentioned this at the beginning, this might not even be aligned with the values of our church.
Correct.
At the beginning. How did you start implementing these things? Was it all at once? Because I think it would be overwhelming as a parent to say, okay, no smartphones, breakfast with my kids, live close to, my job. I can't do all that.
Right.
Is there a way to just kind of like start taking baby steps?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly didn't have the ideal situation where I could walk to my office when I was first married. I was, even to the point that we moved here, I was still commuting 45 minutes each way to work.
Wow.
But knowing that you could do certain things, I think, is a big deal. Now, for me, obviously, we never allowed a lot of those things in the first place, like smartphones, for example. But I would just say to parents who do have teens or young kids with smartphones, it's kind of imperative that they actually make that happen where they don't have access to that. I mean, I think that's like pretty much of all the things we just talked about, that's like the number one thing they could do right now. And if they're in a school community where that's just common, get them out of there.
Wow. Yes.
I mean, there's no easy way to do this.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad you said that, because I'll drive around and I don't want to throw ministries under the bus, but I'll listen to different radio programs and parents will call in with this pleading heart. They're saying, hey, my kid's addicted to pornography, or I found their phone. They're doing this, this, and this, or this is the stuff they're looking at, or their friends are saying this, and the kids at school are doing this. And it never enters the mind of the expert, whatever, giving the advice to get them out of the situation.
It's an emergency operation.
Exactly. It's 100% treating the symptom.
Yep.
It's not at all saying, okay, well, let's back it up and look at the cause. Are there times where we need to, out of emergency, treat the symptom? Of course, that comes up in life, right? Where we need to treat the symptom.
Right.
But with your children, why would you not back way up and say, okay,
get to the root of this, right?
Exactly. And the root, you could go back for, okay, well, it is sin, but boy, are you giving provision for the flesh? Big time, which the Bible tells us not to do. Do not give provision for the flesh.
The analogy, or what I like to say is that, if you had a group, say you had a group of young men who were renting a house together, everyone having unrestricted access to smartphones, and say they're all young, 18, 19, 20-year-old men, that would be kind of like having a prostitute in the closet.
Yes. And
expecting them to just be like, oh yeah, you guys should be able to resist.
Yes.
So I just think it's unreasonable given human nature.
100% agree. And I think I love hearing people do things. When people do things, you said radical intentionality brings forth a different looking life.
Right.
And I don't even realize my limiting beliefs. Actually, nobody realizes their limiting beliefs until they're challenged, or that you're seeing that there's an alternative to them. And I think there are many parents that don't actually look at no smartphone as an option.
Right.
And a lot of times baby parents are scared to be the bad guy for whatever, a week or a year or whatever, however long you're the bad guy for. But boy, is it worth, be the bad guy.
That's what true love is oftentimes.
Amen. And likewise with the school situation, I'm thinking, okay, I've seen so many parents that I look up to I shouldn't say so many. There's a handful of parents that I really admire that have done, and they're all radical. Mm-hmm. They say, okay, this group of friends, I got to get them out. Okay, there's still this environment. Okay, I'm going to move. Okay, I'm going to change jobs. Okay, I'm going to whatever, get them off the sports team. I'm going to do these things that culture says, oh, you got to finish the season, or at least let them finish the grade, right? Let them get through 6th grade, and then you can change schools. Like, you don't do that with this type of stuff.
No.
Like, you don't mess around with it. It's like, no, now.
Right.
Like, you're letting the coach down, you're letting the teacher down, you're letting the youth group leader down. Okay, you're safe. We're talking about your child's
eternal soul. Their child's eternal soul is a little bit more important than that.
Amen. And anyway, so I could go on and on with this, but thanks for bringing that up, because I love the whole preface of, okay, if we want radically different results than the status quo, we've got to assume this is going to look radically different. However, not getting overwhelmed with that and saying, let's take baby steps, but some of these baby steps might be just the lowest hanging fruit, which is get rid of the smartphone. I mean, people know we're pro, especially with our kiddos. Not having the smartphones in our home.
You look at the rates of teen depression and suicide and dysmorphia and everything associated with mental and spiritual health, and it all goes back to that access to the smartphone, social media. And I think that people are going to look back at this era and say, wow, I can't believe we allowed unrestricted access like that to smartphones.
Yes. And And yet you're raising very capable children that are going to engage in culture at a high level. And I want to do the same with my kiddos.
Right.
And what's not necessary is social media or a smartphone. That's not necessary.
No.
Like it's not a necessary component to being highly effective,
right.
highly functioning in this world. All right. Well, I tell you what, I like hearing that. Probably got a little too fired up about that. But I do admire that. When it comes to being engaged with your community, you talked about wanting to have an impact in your community,
sure.
but yet still protecting the home.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, what it looks like is, I want to do as much as I can to create a culture of robust cultural and economic institutions that support the way of life that we're talking about. Because as important as the family is, you can't do that alone. And ultimately, you do need bigger things to engage with and be a part of. Starts with your parish or your church community as well. But then it goes beyond that. It goes to locally owned businesses and who are you going to be able to employ, of your community's children as they grow older. It extends to cultural institutions. What is that going to look like in terms of art and music and, all the things that can really enliven our culture? And, a lot of this is out of a motivation to do two things. One, to make our children want to stay near us and really think that there's a depth to where we live and our culture and, the options that they have here that are all good options. And then number two is to paint an alternative vision of society and culture that is not so dominated by the secular left, because really they care about institutions a lot. They care about producing content and art and all that sort of stuff. They care about controlling corporations. They care about owned space. And so us, kind of going on the offensive and actually creating our own spaces and actually creating a positive vision of what a thoroughly Christian informed culture at all its different levels could look like, I think is really important.
I love that vision. And, this is something that, again, everybody's got different backgrounds with their theology and the way they've been taught different things. And so grateful for my upbringing. But I don't know if it was the eschatology viewpoint that we were brought up with, what it was. But this whole concept of maybe it's even been called pietism, that just the only thing that matters is the spiritual person almost, kind of like,
right.
And of course, eternity is of the utmost importance. And
of course.
And the gospel, man, it's the power of God unto salvation.
Right.
So then amen. Like
right.
that is the greatest thing on ever, right? But we don't all receive Christ. We're not the thief on the cross.
Right.
It's like, okay, you're saved and then you died the second later.
Right.
Lord willing, we're Christians from a young age,
Absolutely.
walking with him. And what does that life look like?
Yeah. To me, the analogy is, okay, going back to the family culture, being radically intentional about the family, creating a great environment of culture, Christian culture in your family. What if instead the father, the mother just thought, I'm just going to pursue Jesus. I'm going to pray. I'm going to evangelize. And my kids, the quality of the cooking, the home, the environment. I'm not going to pay attention to that. To me, that's the same thing that's going on, but one level up to the level of the community and to society. When people say, what goes on out there? I don't care about that. I know I'm saved. No, we need to create an environment that is actually promoting the salvation of others through the exposure to all the good gifts of this world, which can be sanctified by the truth of the gospel and by God's grace. So that's possible in the family. We know that. We've been talking about it for this whole episode. That can also be done at the level of the society.
I love you bringing that example up, because I don't know if anybody would argue with the value of being intentional in the context of the home.
Right.
Maybe people would, but the point, I don't think our listeners would, I should say.
Sure.
They say, no, what are you talking about? Discipling your children, creating an environment where they're eating a good meal, They're, wearing clean clothes. They have good,
Right.
work ethic. Our house is ran by good moral principles.
Right.
One might even say Christian principles,
Yeah.
things that are based off of God's word. We see that being a healthy thing.
Right.
We don't say, we don't want them to become legalistic in their behavior, thinking that their morality is going to save them. No, we teach them God's law.
That's right.
From a young age. We teach them honesty.
Right.
We teach them that lying is sinful and wrong.
Yep.
And do we hope that they come to a saving knowledge of their need for God's grace? Absolutely. We want to do that. But we don't use that as a reason to say it actually doesn't matter. Your
Right.
work ethic, it doesn't matter.
Right.
The quality of your practice or the quality of your homework, the quality of anything that you're doing. You said, we'll just take that same principle literally across the street. Like, you don't even go far. Like, okay, step
Right.
outside the door and take that across the street.
That's right.
Is it better when the business owner is a Christian that has Christian values and morals? I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's better when I'm working for a Christian boss.
Absolutely. Or if your local laws conform to the natural law, or if your neighborhoods are designed in a beautiful way that elevates the mind to God, all of this stuff can be put under that umbrella.
Yeah. And so, again, I've got family members that have devoted their life towards missions overseas in Africa and then in South America, 2 different cousins. And it's interesting how the gospel's going forth, praise the Lord. But you know what also always needs to happen when they go to these third world and depraved cultures is just common infrastructure.
That's right.
They say, well, we need some clean, okay, it's really hard. We need some clean water. We need some buildings.
That's right.
We need clothing. Everybody's walking around, not fully dressed. What do? They start implementing values
Right.
and morals.
Right.
Not because that's what saves people. No, but it's a part of life.
It's just the foundational elements of society that need
Yes.
to be there.
Yes,
So-
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't want to take any more of your time. Skylar, how can people find you, or any parting words? You brought me a book. I'm really excited about this. Any reading recommendations for people to kind of start wrapping their mind around, this vision, because it comes off your tongue like it's so obvious,
Right.
but this is stuff that's not obvious to me. It's not obvious to, I'd say, the average Christian. So where can
Yeah.
people start and kind of starting to wrap their mind around a family vision?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, this is a book that I think is actually very helpful in terms of understanding the nature of marriage and family. And there's a lot of confusion out there. So this is a very natural law based. What is a family? What does it mean? What does sexual relations mean between husband and wife? And it's called Understanding Marriage and Family by Sebastian Walsh.
Okay.
So this is a great one. As far as stuff about the household economy, it's really fascinating to look at what our history was with respect to that. And the works of Alan Carlson, who is a Lutheran sociologist and historian, have been very helpful for me in that regard. Just look up Alan Carlson. Great stuff on the history of the American family and what it looked like in the past and what communities looked like in the past and how that's just radically changed. And it kind of gives you a vision of, okay, what could a social and familial return to that really look like? So I'll just kind of leave it at those two. And
Love it. Yeah, I don't want to overwhelm listeners or myself for that matter. Again, Skylar, thank you so much. I'll link anywhere people can find you, whether that's LinkedIn and anything like that.
Yeah, LinkedIn is primarily just a professional profile,
Yes.
so I don't have a huge social media presence. I try to, limit my time on there, but I do have a Twitter account too. So people, if they want to DM me on there, if they've listened to this podcast, happy to chat with them as well on there. So those are the two I have. So
Awesome. Thank you so much, Skylar.
thanks.